Okay, welcome everybody. Are you holding up, okay? Great. I'm Stewart Wallis, I'm the Director of New Economics Foundation, and this is a session on modelling the Great Transition, why money matters. And because you've heard quite a bit from me in the plenary, etc., I'm not going to say anything at this stage. I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Tim Jenkins here, who's our Director of Great Transition and External Affairs. And he's going to talk a little bit about the Great Transition, and then Emanuele Campiglio, I'm not sure I pronounced it perfectly, but
that's fine.
That's good, is going to give the main presentation on what we've been doing on this very innovative and new model. Tim.
About 2 years ago, the New Economics Foundation in the UK made a decision that whilst we had some fantastic teams doing work on social policy, finance and business, the environment, well-being, valuing what matters. Each of them would run their own campaigns, do their own work, but in actual fact, the challenge that we all faced, as this conference is making very clear, was about systemic change that required all of these things to be able to work in concert, to be able to be seen as part of a much bigger challenge. And so in actual fact, we set up what we referred to as the Great Transition, which was sort of an overarching narrative that would allow us to try and make the whole greater than the sum of the parts of our work.
Closer to it.
And we set forth and we had four main things that we were going to try and achieve. And the first thing was an internal thing for us, which was to get all our teams to actually operate like that, to realise that their work was actually part of something greater, that we needed to communicate to broader audiences than we currently did. So outside of the 500 people who would turn up to this conference, and to be able to communicate it and engage and empower people around that idea. And we're well on the way to being able to do that. And when Stewart gave his presentation yesterday and he referred to 6 things that we thought are required to get that transition going, they're part of an internal process where those teams have actually worked together rather than being in their silos, working separately. But then we had 3 main things we wanted to do externally to deliver the Great Transition. The first of which, and 2 of them have been continual themes in this conference so far. The first of which was to try and build a movement. And to build a movement that was beyond just our own constituencies to start with, and actually move out further to warmer audiences, to get people to be engaged with and to take action around a movement for change for a new economy. And we've done quite a lot of different things to be able to take that forward. The second thing, which is connected to that, was actually to run some campaigns. Movements tend to die if people aren't actually doing small steps that are achieving things that they know are the first step on the way to making larger change. And so to run particular campaigns, the one that we've spent a lot of time on in the UK was around banking reform and setting up the firewall between investment banking and high street banking. And the last thing that we did, which is quite separate but is externally facing, was that, and it's interesting in actual fact, in the last presentation when, I'm sorry, I've forgotten her Michelle, was mentioning her macroeconomics lecturer, is that we decided that if people have read Tim Jackson's book, Prosperity Without Growth, which ends by saying we need a new macroeconomics. We need to look at the assumptions that are made in current macroeconomics and change them, develop them in a way that is fit for purpose for the new economy. And one of the things that happens in terms of macroeconomics is that it's very, very dominated by a particular school of thought and models that are developed on a set of assumptions that most people in this room will know what those assumptions are and how ridiculous some of them are in comparison with where we need to get to. And so we set about creating a model that would actually be able to usefully be able to build scenarios of what a new economy might be able to look like. And one of the things that we were doing, which was most important to us, was to say that unlike all conventional models, which assume that the finance sector is outside of the economy, it's not normally inside of the model, it's just assumed that it will benignly provide a steady flow of money as the economy requires it, and will have no adverse effect. It's just sat there as a sort of benign supplier. As we've seen, that is not how the real world operates or where we are at the moment. And so we actually wanted to put it inside of the model to be able to change how we looked at it. And we've got to a point where we're actually being able to take that out now. and discuss it with people and go to audiences who are very interested in it, whether that's the Bank of England, whether that's the investment community, or whether it's the UK government. And the person who's done the most work on that, and he's about to give you a presentation on that, is Emanuele, who's sat to my right, and he's going to talk you through where we're up to, and maybe say a little bit also about where we go next with a model, and how it can be developed from here. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. So, just a brief introduction. It has become increasingly clear how traditional economic models are not able, haven't been able to understand some of the crucial features of the dynamics of the economy, especially regarding the crisis, in understanding and fighting the crisis. So there have been many waves of new research in economic theory and economic analysis to improve the situation. So I'm just going to mention two of them, which are the most important to our work, which is, the first one has to do with the sustainability of development. So this has to do with energy and climate change and environmental limits, planetary boundaries, and so on. So for example, the already mentioned work by Tim Jackson, Prosperity Without Growth. Another very important reference for us was Peter Victor's model, Low Grow. And the other main area is the finance one. So the role of banks, how they create money, how they allocate money, the role of debt into the macroeconomy. So we just wanted to participate to this very exciting research in trying to establish new ways of thinking at the economy and how the economy works. So we started by trying to build a macroeconomic model of the UK. Our research question at the beginning of our work was the one that you can read. So how to manage the UK economy within environmental limits whilst delivering increasing well-being. And we chose to use a system dynamics methodology. I'll show you something about it in a minute. So this, let's say, first part of research ended last year. In October, we published a working paper, let's say a technical description of the model, which is available upon request. I mean, I can send it to you very easily. And this was before including banks and money. So at that moment, we had a very detailed framework of the of the UK economy, but at the same time, we were a bit unsatisfied by some of its features. So, for example, we had to do a lot of assumptions on some crucial parameters, and most of all, it was really difficult to manage the model. The ones among you that have familiarity with system dynamics may know how difficult it becomes when the model becomes complex to actually be able to understand the results, what the results mean, and how to change the structure. So in October 2011, we started to focus on money and banking. This is an area where the mainstream modeling performances have been very poor. And it is no surprise, actually, because in mainstream models, there is no money, no banks, no debt. There is not. And I can tell you because I recently finished a PhD in using neoclassical economics, and I used to know nothing about money because neoclassical economics just doesn't have money. That's how it goes. And I also went and looked at the macroeconomic models of central banks. So I looked at the Bank of England, at the Fed, at the European Central Bank, and they all have macro models, macroeconometric models, in order to understand how the economy works and make forecastings. And they don't have banks. They don't have. It's not like they have very, I don't know, a simplistic representation of banks. Banks do not exist in their economy. And we're talking about models of hundreds of equations. So it's no surprise that they didn't see the crisis coming, and now they're struggling to understand how to solve the crisis. So there are no banks, or if present, they're seen just as intermediaries. So taking the savings from someone that saves and giving them to some other people that want to borrow, okay? This is not how banking works. This is not how money works, because banks create new money, new purchasing power. And this was very well explained also in some of the sessions at this conference. So every loan creates a deposit. This is the main phrase. I think it's useful to understand the concept. So every time we go to a bank and ask for a loan, the bank creates a new deposit that then the borrower can use in order to pay rents or pay for purchases and so on. So it becomes effectively new purchasing power. So for example, look at this quote. By far the largest role in creating broke money is played by the banking sector. When banks make loans, they create additional deposits for those that have borrowed. So this is not some, heterodox, crazy economist. It's the Bank of England in 2007 in one of their papers. So this thing of banks creating money is clear to anyone who actually studies the topic. Among them, you can find very few economists because of the reasons I already mentioned. So usually economists do not get this part, okay? But it's quite easy to understand, because if you look at this graph, so the red line is the monetary base, so it's coins and notes and central bank reserves, and the green one is the broader money supply, including deposits. So you can see how the two lines actually diverge. They don't seem to have any meaningful relationship. And for any of you who are interested in knowing more, this is a very nice book published by NEF from some colleagues of ours, and you can easily find it, and it has been very useful for me to understand this kind of topics. This graph, by the way, is taken by this book, from this book, okay? So the model. At the moment, so we stepped back from the large, detailed framework, the unstable framework, let's say, to concentrate on this point, on this crucial point of banks creating new purchasing power for firms. So the framework, I'll show it to you, is a bit simpler than before. We spent a great deal of time in making sure that the model is consistent. We used a sort of double-entry bookkeeping representation for the model. I'll show it to you. And so we ended up with a consistent framework, a basic consistent framework. And the idea would be to use this framework, modify it in order to answer to a range of research questions. And here I just listed some questions which I believe can be assessed by our model. I'll talk a bit more in the conclusions on this. So just system dynamics, just a very quick slide. It's just a method to study the behavior of complex systems, and usually things appear like this, okay? So you have three basic units. You have stocks, like population, and you have flows, so being born and dying, so flows going in and out the stocks, and then you have parameters or simultaneous equations, which are called connectors. So at the end, this is just it's called iconic representation, but at the end, it's just a list of differential and simultaneous equations, okay? You just put it in a way so that the feedback loops are explicitly represented. The structure of the model is like this. So we have some agents, banks, central bank, what we call gilt sellers. You can think of them as pension funds. So they're an entity that buys and sells gilts. We have households, we have firms, and we have the government. And then all these sectoral accounts are represented using double-entry bookkeeping. I'll show it to you in a minute. And then we have a macro framework, okay, which is, let's say, an aggregate framework. This is the macro framework. So we have output, output Y. So the output is produced using capital and labor, and with a technology parameter A, representing productivity. So the production function is a very usual function. It's called Cobb-Douglas function. Then the output is distributed into wages, according to a certain wage share, and profits, okay? So the output is actually equal to the income. All the output is then distributed among workers and firms. So then the wages are taxed, and the net wages are completely spent, completely consumed, and all the tax revenues are spent by the government. So this is clearly just a simplification. The reason why we did this is that we wanted to concentrate on the firms, first of all. We will then allow households and governments to accumulate debt as well. While firms have profits, and then they decide how much to invest, but they may not invest their profits. They may want to invest more and ask for loans to the banks. So investments are actually equal to profits plus the net change in debt, okay? And then this consumption, government expenditures, and the investments so defined create the aggregate demand, okay? So this is quite simple, but useful equation to understand what's going on. So income plus the net change in debt is equal to the aggregate demand. So if my current spending, my future spending plans are higher than my income today, then we will have growth, okay? Because I will go to the bank, ask for loans, and have the money, and use that money to invest more. This all happens in one period, okay? So call it time t. In the same time t, the firms decide how much labor it desires. Okay, this is just the inverse of the production function using aggregate demand instead of income. That means that the firms look at the aggregate demand and they decide to hire the number of laborers that are necessary in order to satisfy the demand. Okay, and then we go to time t+1. In time t+1, what happens is that the investments become new capital. The desired labor affects the new level of employment, and capital at time t+1 and LT+1, together with the productivity factor, creates the new output at time t+1, which is then distributed, and the cycle takes place again. While the sectoral accounts, so banks, firms, and so on, are built like this. So we have this kind of representation. We used it because we felt that most of the models are not consistent in economic theory, so they don't actually look at where flows come in and where they go. We wanted to be sure that everything was consistent. So every agent is built like this, with an asset side and a liability side. Okay, so that the total assets are equal to the total liabilities, and the total change in assets is equal to the change in liabilities. So, for example, these are the private banks. Of course, this is a simplified balance sheet, yes? So in this case, private banks have reserves, central bank reserves, and loans as assets, and they have just one liability, as to say, deposits. Then these are the firms. The firms have two assets, deposits and the capital stock, which is then the variable that goes into the production function, and they have one liability, as to say, loans to banks. And this is the balance sheet of the central bank, so this is quite simple. We just have gilts as assets and reserves as liabilities, okay? And they move together. So how does credit creation work? Okay, so in our model, credit creation involves four agents: banks, central bank, the gilt sellers, and the firms. Okay, so the first step is the bank lends 100 pounds, dollars, whatever, to the firm, okay? So this appears 4 times. 2 times in the T account of the private bank, 1 time as an asset and 1 time as a liability, and 2 times in the and twice in the non-financial firms account, okay? So as deposits in the asset side and as loans in the liability side. Then the bank seeks new reserves at the central bank. So the bank goes to the central bank and asks for new reserves. That may sound strange, but it's actually how things work, at least at the Bank of England, or more precisely, how they used to work before the QE, the quantitative easing. So this is let's say, the traditional functioning of money creation. Banks going to the central bank once a month and setting what it's called the target reserves. And the central bank just creates new reserves. Then what happens is that the central bank has to balance its balance sheets, so it buys gilts from the secondary market, as to say the pension funds or the gilt sellers, and the last step is this one. So the gilt seller deposits increase, so this plus 10 then appears again as a liability in the private bank asset, in the private bank balance sheet, because deposits are a liability to banks. So this is just another way to represent the same thing. So suppose this is the balance sheet of private banks. So the bank gives a loan, okay? It appears twice. The loan stock increases, the deposit stock increases, and then the creation of reserves is like this. So the reserve stock increases by 10 and the deposits again by 10, okay? So by money creation, by credit creation, the balance sheet of the bank is expanded, okay? So this is the actual model. So this is how the model looks like. So on the right, you have these are the bank's assets. You have loans and you have reserves. So on the bottom right corner, we have some crucial variables. So the first one is the desired investments. So the firm obtains profits. It pays out debt and interests, okay, back to the bank. These are called the net profits, the pi-n. Okay. Then desired investments are a parameter eta of the profit of the net profits. Okay. So suppose that eta is equal to 1. That means that all the net profits are invested and nothing more. Okay. If eta is equal to 2, say, that means that the firm takes the net profits and then wants to invest more. Okay? If eta is higher than 1, it means that the firm wants to invest more than its profits. So then it goes to the bank and asking for loans. And the demand for loans is quite simple. It's just the desired investments less the net profits. Okay? So what's missing to the firm to invest what it desires. And then the credit creation is a parameter beta, which is a proxy for bank's confidence of the demanded loans. So say I go to the bank and ask for $100. Then if beta is equal to 1, it means that the bank just gives me 100. Okay, the whole amount I ask. If beta is equal to 0.8, it means that it gives me 80% of what I ask. Okay, so these are firm's assets. You see that you have two stocks, non-financial firms deposits and productive capital. So output is transformed into sales, and they go into the deposits of firms. Then there are some outflows, such as the debt repayment and the payment of wages. And then some new money comes in form of credit creation, okay? What is called external finance. And finally, this outflow represents investments, which in this case, we modeled it like this, just flowing from the deposits to the capital stock, okay? And the investments, the flow of investments are equal to the net profits plus the credit creation, So the firm invests the whole amount of profits. We have another parameter. We allow the firm actually to accumulate deposits, but it's no use talking about it here. So suppose they just invest the whole amount of net profits plus what the bank gives to the firm. And this is just the central bank and the gilt sellers, but maybe I can just move on. So this is the interface of the model. This is a software called Stella. This is the interface. So it's quite fun and useful to use this software. So you can look at the high-level structure of the model. So these are all the sectors I already more or less showed you. Then you can look at the main dashboard, which is the place where we do simulations. I'll show you some in a minute. So you can play around with it. And then we have a control panel. And here, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. So a control panel where we can change the value of parameters. We can impose shocks. I'll show you some. And we can change the initial values. I mean, there is a range of tools in this software that can be used. As I said, it's quite fun. Well, not always, but most of the time. And then we have single pages for every agent. So we have banks, we have firms, and so on. And last thing, we have a consistency page, which is quite important to us because we spend a lot of time being sure that everything is consistent. So we elaborated some consistency checks, essentially. So, for example, these are the balances, and they need to be equal to 0 in order to be balanced. So this is just a computing thing, but it's always equal to 0. And here on the left, we have other checks in order to be sure that everything that goes in must be accounted twice in the balance sheets. So this is the default scenario. So you can see, so the software itself decides the scale of the graph. But anyway, bear with me 1 second. So you can see that in this case, the aggregate demand is higher than the output, okay? And the difference is equal to the net credit creation, as to say, to the change in debt. So the aggregate demand is higher. That means that firms go to the banks, ask for loans, and then invest the money that the banks give to them. And this, of course, increases the aggregate demand in form of new investments, okay? So you have an increasing trend, and then it slows out. The net credit creation converges to 0. And then we have many other graphs. This is just a disaggregation of the aggregate demand into consumption, investments, and expenditures by government. This one is the growth rate of the economy. So you see that you have an explosion at the beginning, and then it goes to 0. And then you have all the other variables. You can just play around with graphs. Okay, so, and one other thing, it's employment. This is the unemployment rate. So in this booming economy, okay, where the ETA parameter is set to 1.2, that means that usually firms want to invest 20% more than their net profits. Okay, in this booming economy, in 15 years, 20 years, 0 unemployment. So what happens, for example, if we play around with the initial values? So say that we have an initial value of loans of 50,000 instead of 20,000. The economy still grows, okay? You can see that net credit creation is negative, and you can see that the aggregate demand, because of that, is lower than the output, okay? So this, in our framework, would mean a recession. And we do have some kind of recession. If you look at the first periods, you have an increase in the unemployment rate, okay? But then the profits are so high anyway that the investments, you can look at this in this graph. Yeah, So you see the net investments, the number 3, is anyway higher than the capital depreciation. I'm sorry, the investments, which is number 1, is higher than the capital depreciation, so you have positive net investments. So although you have an aggregate demand lower than the output, you still have an economy growing, okay, in the long term. But if we put the loans at a higher level still, say this level, this is just too much. The economy collapses, okay? So when the stock of debt becomes too high, the economy just goes down. Why is that? Because the flows of debt repayment and interest payments are just too high. You can see it here, okay? So you see you have profits equal to 21,000, but then with such a large stock of debt, the debt repayment and the interest payment determine negative net profits, okay? So the economy never grows back from this. Then, just stop me when it's done. I'm gonna show just a couple of shocks. So for example, let's put the value back to a normal one, and let's try to see what happens when we have bank confidence collapse. Okay, so we impose a shock. That means that at time 70, the beta parameter goes from 1 to 0.4. Okay, so you have a collapse in the confidence of banks. So banks do not want to give credit anymore, which is sort of what's happening right now. No, so what happens is this. So you have the pink line is the net credit creation. So you have a collapsing credit creation. The debt repayment is higher than the credit creation. So you have a net credit creation which is negative. That means you can see the blue and red line are the aggregate demand and the output. That means that the economy goes to a new steady state which is lower than the previous one. So if you look at, for example, the growth rate, this is a sensitivity analysis graph. Let me just show it to you like this. Boom. You have negative growth for some periods, and then it converges back to 0. And if you look at unemployment, it's something similar. So you have an increase in employment, you go and touch 0, but then you go back to very high levels of unemployment. Let's try just another one, which is the animal spirits. Okay, so at time 70, eta jumps from 1.2 to 1.8. Eta is the propensity to invest, let's call it. So it's the amount of net profits that then the firms desire to invest. I called it animal spirits because they just want to invest more for no reason. So now this is what happens. It's quite nice because you have an increase in credit creation. So you see the net credit creation, as to say credit creation less debt repayment, goes at very high levels. Okay, so there's a massive increase in credit creation because the bank's confidence is still equal to 1. It's just that the firms ask a lot of money to the banks. But you can see that then you have an increase at the beginning, but then you have a decreasing trend in both output and aggregate demand. That's just because the stock of loans, which you can see here, so the stock of loans becomes very, very big, okay? That means that the firm has to repay much more debt and has to pay much more interest. So at the end, this is detrimental, okay? So there's a massive increase in firms' confidence, but this then results in lower long-run growth rates. Okay, I'll stop with the simulation. I prepared some other so cool, but there's just no time. No, let's just go back 1 second to the conclusions. So there's still much work to do. For example, we want to allow households and governments to accumulate debt. This is not going to be very difficult because we just have to replicate what we've done for firms to households and government. And then we want to make some of these parameters that I showed you endogenous. So at the moment, you can see they're all exogenous. You can play around, but there is no determination of the bank's confidence or the propensity to invest by firms. So for example, the ETA could be a function of the growth rate, the profit rate, the interest rate, or the beta, the bank's confidence, can be as well a function of the growth rate, of the profit rate. We still have to figure out the economic theory. We have some ideas, we're still working on it. Another thing we want to look at is, for example, how do central bank interest rates affect the interest rates in the economy? So the ones applied to deposits and loans. And then in the future, in the near future, we would like to go in this direction. So, for example, try to understand, apart from the creation of money by banks, we want to look at the allocation of money into society, okay? So, for example, we want to look at this productive versus speculative investments. So money can be created and allocated to firms or maybe speculators or people that want to, I don't know, speculate on asset prices and so on. So this allocation of money in society is likely to have different effects on the way that the macroeconomy behaves. Okay, we want to have a look at that. The same thing, but applied to, let's say, a green economy field, is looking at how firms can, banks can allocate credit to dirty versus clean firms, okay? And try to understand how this has repercussion on the environment and climate change and so on. And another thing that we will really like to do is try to understand how now QE is changing the picture that I just showed you. And then we would like to test alternatives. So, for example, in this conference, you've heard a lot of credit controls, public money, and full fractional reserve banking. For example, this morning there was an exciting session about this stuff. We think we could be able to test all these ideas using this model. And so, stay tuned. Yeah. Thank you.
So, yeah, let's just take questions. I think while Emanuele has gone into lots of the technical things, you're seeing something totally new. It just don't exist. And not to have a tool out there to be able to answer these questions, and for us to be creating one in the new economy sector is really powerful, because we actually are going to get credibility. We'll be able to answer some of those questions that other people just can't answer at the minute. So this is big, really important stuff. Questions? Please, over here.
Okay, so like, wow, amazing. Can't wait till you get done with this. Are you imagining that this is something that is really geared to a national economy, a multinational economy? Can it be applied at the local level or the state level? Like, what's the scale of usefulness in your minds once you're done with the modeling?
Thanks, great question. Emanuele, do you want to?
Well, at the moment, the model is, let's say, just a model, an academic model. So it potentially applies to any economy. The idea would be to have, the first step would be to have something more focused on the UK economy. I guess it could work for any national economy. It could work also, to look at the trade. So you can say it could work with multi-economies. And I don't know about the local level, because at that level probably you will need to modify the structure of the model itself, because you don't have the same things. You don't have the same agents. You have to consider other stuff. But potentially, I mean, this is a very exciting tool. I've been working with this system dynamics for 2 or 3 years now, but it has very big potentialities. So you could potentially do anything with it. You just have to have let's say, a framework into your mind of what you need to do and some connections. But then it works fine. Yeah.
Great. Let's take one in the middle there, please.
If I understand correctly, the modeling that you presented up till the very last point, and it's 3 subsidiary bullet points, were modeling kind of our existing economy. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more on how this modeling helps with the transition, the great transition.
Mm-hmm. You want to answer that?
Yeah, when we first started off, and Emanuele said we started off in a particular direction to maybe answer some of those questions more immediately down the path. In particular, we imagined the stuff about the green economy and where investment was going to happen far sooner. We're not a large university department with a whole school of PhD students feeding into a model building. It's 2 people, basically, who do most of this work. And what happened is that when we came to put the finance sector in, that's when everything changed. As Emanuele was trying to say at the beginning, we had to take a point of view that to get credibility, actually, with a lot of the people we were going to take this model to, because our analysis had finance at the heart of it, that finance was not taken seriously and had to be. We just had to do this work first. And so, in a way, a lot of the work we did in that first year is now going to be able to feed in and start to answer those next questions as we go through it probably over the next 12 months to get there. And yeah, it is in a way frustrating that you can't get to the point of saying, so what would that look like if you were able to direct investment towards a green economy? What happens if you actually did change the banking system so that debt didn't play the role that it does now? But we are going to be able to get onto those. The first question, in fact, as Emanuele was saying in this at the end there, is by looking at asset prices, one of the big things that we can do is, at the moment when quantitative easing is used in the UK anyway, is that largely what it just goes into asset prices. So it goes into a speculative economy. None of it goes to the productive economy properly at all. And so that'll give us an opportunity, a here and now opportunity, to be able to say, you know, if you use quantitative easing, you should use it to go into productive assets, to go into green assets, actually. And what would that look like? And that won't affect the next round, which is coming up pretty soon. But already the Bank of England, in fact, are very interested in this model. Yeah, I mean, as Stuart's saying, it's absolutely crazy that there wasn't an economic model that allowed them to say, if we allow banks to keep on producing this amount of credit, this amount of debt, the thing crashes. And now you're in a position to be able to look at that. So it is frustrating, but we had to go back to this point because it is so fundamental, really, to build up from.
Sadly, we probably only got time for 1, possibly 2 questions, depending how quick. I know front row here, Mike.
I'm just wondering to what extent in the modeling on the finance system, how have you dealt with, if you will, the real economy, which, as we understand it, I don't know what it is in the UK, but globally is around 60 trillion, and a speculative economy, which is around 700 trillion?
No, we haven't done that still. So at the moment, we have banks as the only financial institutions, and let's say the economy is all real. We just have firms producing capital. Yeah. No, but that's a good point. But what I was trying to explain also is that the idea that we have is to build this framework that works. We know that it's consistent. You know, everything is right, and then modify it according to what we want to look at. So, for example, the first thing we want to look at is exactly this one. So, how money is allocated into the real economy into the unreal economy.
Yeah,
okay.
The casino. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, definitely we're gonna do that just in the very near future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sadly, we're out of time, and there's lots more people wanting questions. This is really the beginning of something, but I think why we wanted to show it is because we see it as so important that we got credibility as macroeconomists, that we actually can represent better how the economy is really working, and we will, in the end, watch this space, be able to answer all those questions about how we can both create good jobs, create public goods, and do so within fair ecological limits. This is what will give us the tool to actually say, this is the path, this is what the actions need, this is what we need to change. And so that's why it's so important. It can seem nerdy, but this is absolutely fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you.